Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by LB Harvey. She's the VP of Sales at Intercom, and we are going to talk about what you need to do to stand out as an early sales manager. LB, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Collin. Excited to join today.
I always like to look for, what is the unique perspective that a guest can bring to the audience, to our audience. And I think one of the things that really stands out is that you've held not only have you held a variety of roles on, in the sales world, but you've also helped so many others sort of level up. So that's really what we're focusing the episode on. But before we jump into the content there, can you talk to me about your journey from, how you got to be VP of Sales at Intercom?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career as an SDR. Back in the day at a management consulting company called Corporate Executive Board. Had a really strong kind of sales fundamental training program and kind of a true sales culture. It was a very sales-oriented company. And that's really where I learned the art of getting into the office at 6:30 a.m. and hitting a call list and trying to get a hold of chief human resource officers. It was the vertical I was calling into. So I started off as a outbound SDR, still one of my favorite jobs. I moved into kind of a full cycle enterprise role at that company, moved out from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco with Corporate Executive Board, met with a mentor of mine who advised that given that I was living in the Bay Area, I might want to consider transitioning into tech sooner versus later before I built a career in non-tech and then had to kind of take several steps back to enter into tech. Mm-hmm. She actually connected me with folks at LinkedIn. And I a couple months later joined LinkedIn as an account executive, did that role for about a year, and then built out, along with a co-manager, LinkedIn's first sales development organization that both handled inbound leads as well as built our first kind of outbound engine. And then from there, I managed several frontline teams, starting in kind of the SMB space, working myself up to managing enterprise teams. And then made my first leap into managing managers by running the North America SMB group at LinkedIn, and then eventually running SMB and Enterprise North America for the LTS division. And then 3 years ago, had the opportunity to join Intercom and have been here and learning a ton ever since.
Wow. So quite possibly almost every sort of type of sales role in the B2B world, you've either been in that role or you've managed that role.
Yes.
Right on.
I would say core selling. I think there's definitely organizations like what we call customer solutions here, which is basically our sales engineers and then our customer success managers that I did not directly manage frontline or second line, and have had the opportunity to kind of learn that here at Intercom. And certainly this is my first time managing a sales ops org as well. Yeah, in terms of kind of full cycle or like core selling roles, SDR or full cycle roles. Yeah, absolutely.
Right on. And it's such a unique perspective because as you get to the top, I mean, the math is simple, right? Everybody wants to be VP of sales, but if you got 100 people, 100 reps on the team, and they all are gunning for the VP of sales job or a VP of sales job, those, the farther you go up, the fewer and fewer jobs there are, the fewer and fewer people there are to sort of advise you and help you out and tell you what type of experience you need to get there. And so that's really where I really wanted to focus here is, the things that you really need to do to stand out, not necessarily making the jump from rep to sales manager. I think we're starting with the assumption that you're already in a sales management position. Mm-hmm. And then what we want to look at is how do you go from sales manager and sort of build your career so that you're the one that's being tapped to be the sort of VP of Intercom or SVP of sales for Intercom when LB eventually, runs the world.
Yeah, I don't think anyone wants me running the world, but yes, absolutely. I definitely have some thoughts on how you can, as kind of an earlier stage sales manager, start learning the right skills to eventually get you, if you do have the aspiration of being the person that's running the function, running the team, some of the areas to really focus in on and learn early in your career, for sure.
Right on. And so maybe let's start with that high level. What are because we talked about sort of four things. What are those 4 things at a high level? And then we'll jump into the first one.
Yeah. So I think the 4 things that are really important when you're kind of starting your career as a frontline manager from my point of view are, 1, really being able to prioritize and focus your team on the things that matter and are going to help move the needle. The second is to make sure that you've got the right folks on the bus and that you stand out as someone who can kind of attract great talent and retain great talent, but also isn't afraid to come in and own the difficult conversations and performance manage. The third is to really do the right things for the business and be able to kind of like what I call put on your business leader hat, not just orient yourself and your team on their individual performances and success and how to like maximize the comp plan, but really how to operate as a business leader early. And then the fourth piece is to really understand how decisions get made and actually not be someone that's afraid of making reasonably fast decisions, which I think is a real key in a sales leadership role.
Right on. And so that's great. And so let's jump into prioritization here. Yep. So when we're talking about prioritization, especially in the context of, as a sales manager, what's the sort of most important piece to focus on here?
Yeah. I mean, I think at any given time in a sales environment, there are like 100 things that you could be focusing on. When you're a rep, you could be focused on outbounding and building pipeline. You could be focused on moving forward the opportunities that you have in the pipe. You've got to figure out what are those real opportunities. Where do you want to spend your time? You could be focused on creating more like pricing proposals. There's a ton of inputs and outputs that are expected of you, and speed is of the essence. And I think when you move into a sales manager role, that only goes 10x, right? I mean, there's coaching and developing your team, there's interviewing folks, there's forecasting, there's just a ton of different ways you could be spending your time. And there's a ton of different ways that you could be focusing your team's time and energy. And one of the real keys that I found early in my career to be very important was really creating like a consistent rally cry for my team. So kind of running off in all different directions at any given time. And, I also think there's something to getting everyone to focus on something that's going to really move the needle for the team and the business. So for instance, you could get your entire team focused on building outbound pipeline. You get your whole team focused on selling that new product SKU. You get your whole team focused on how to get a larger initial deal size. But having that kind of single rally point for your team is really important to get some energy and focus around that. I think like a good example of this from early in my career, when I was at LinkedIn and I was managing an SMB AE team, we were short on inbound pipeline. And we had, as we kind of went through our forecasting motions, we realized that we had a gap to our target. And so for the next 4 weeks, I had a concerted effort for my entire team all around building their own outbound pipeline. And we had goals around number of opportunities created and everyone needed to create like 50K a week in pipeline. And we also came together and took an entire day off of our calendars and basically did a big prospecting day and made it kind of fun. We played music. We did handwritten notes. We sent out mailers. So kind of like actually like ABM type stuff. And we saw tremendous results from that. I think we built and we ended up closing something like $300K in new business dollars just from that one day of all getting together and focusing on prospecting. And so I think that's really important as a newer manager or leader, is being able to have that kind of prioritized rally cry for your team.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's really the strategic part of the job, even if you're in that sort of managerial role, which is sort of looking at the numbers and saying, where are the biggest gaps? And then using your sort of insight to drive everybody's attention in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely the strategic part of the job, right? It's what's our objective at the end of the day? Where do we have the biggest opportunity to drive the most impact for the least amount of work, right? And then rallying your team around that, consistently telling them the message, getting them to buy into the message, getting them to then go out and help drive one another towards that.
Mm-hmm. It feels like there's some similarities between the sort of manager and director and sort of VP level in terms of you're looking at the data, you're looking at the information, and then you're trying to rally your team in to basically focus on what they need to be doing to move the needle. How do they differ? Like what does prioritization look like between these different levels?
Yeah, I think they do differ in that I think the percentage of your job that is reactive versus proactive changes as you get more senior. So I think when you are at the sort of like director or VP level, a majority of your time should actually be spent on like strategic, proactive pieces of work, and your job should be less reactive. When you're a frontline manager, I do think that there is an expectation that you are on the floor more, you're more available for that ad hoc coaching. You're going to be spending more time joining deals, coaching in one-to-ones than you are as a VP of sales. So I think prioritization is actually important regardless of what level. And the earlier you learn it, the more effective you're going to be over the course of time. But I think the big difference is just you probably have fewer opportunities to prioritize and sort of rally the team around a shared objective as a frontline manager, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And it's definitely something that you can learn early on.
Gotcha. And so not only is it something that is helpful to learn early on, but it feels like one of those opportunities to really stand out is if you are working really closely with your director, your VP level, and then saying, okay, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. How do I help make sure that if you understand that your VP and your director are just trying to rally the team in the right direction, and you're trying to say, okay, well, how can I be a conduit for you? Kind of demonstrates that maybe you're understanding a little bit higher level.
Yeah, I think there's like two different opportunities when you're a frontline manager to kind of align and actually drive forward, and kind of stand out, to use your language. So one would be absolutely if there are kind of key shared objective rally cries coming from your VP or director, being someone that really make sure that you rally your team around that and drive impact there and kind of own where things are going well and not well, I think is huge, and so appreciated, by the way. And then I think the second is actually, being kind of part of a two-way dialogue there of, let's say that, the organization decides you're going to focus on average deal size on the account executive side. I think a standout frontline manager rallies behind that, tracks to that, is accountable to that, but also maybe pushes the thinking forward and starts thinking about some of the tactics underneath that objective, and then rallies the team, their team specifically around that. So whether it's selling more of a new product SKU to every deal, whether it's getting better at selling to power, and therefore taking what could be a tactical conversation to a more strategic level and earning a bigger footprint within an organization from the get-go. That I think is what really, really stands out. It's yes, making sure your team is behind whatever the kind of company or sales org level priorities are from a revenue perspective, but then it's actually like driving the thinking forward and like challenging on the how we get there and making sure your team's executing.
Maybe LB, I'm wondering if you could tell me about a time, maybe when you're at LinkedIn, so we don't have to go into like the current politics of, you don't have to decide between all your favorite children here at Intercom, because I'm sure everybody's lovely. So maybe going back a couple of years to your time at LinkedIn,
yeah.
Can you tell me about a story when there was maybe a manager that really stood out that was doing a really strong job of prioritization, and you were able to, it helped them stand out, and you sort of noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a manager at LinkedIn that really went above and beyond on kind of AE owned pipeline creation and opportunity creation. So again, this is like a real theme for me on owning your own destiny and the sales team driving to not just sitting back and waiting for inbound leads to come to them, but to actually go out and drive to their own destiny. We rolled out some pretty strong kind of activity expectations for the AE org at LinkedIn and said, hey, if you want to continue to be on our inbound queue, you've got to sign up to drive a certain percentage of your own attainment each quarter. And more specifically, we're expecting you to create 15 opportunities each month on your own. And it's an expectation of an AE at LinkedIn that you're going in and owning your own prospecting and helping generate revenue, all of your own making. And so there was a manager on my team who really was like an early adopter on that and actually set her team's bar higher and said, hey, if 15 is the minimum, we're going to drive to like 20 self-created opportunities, and had like really managed to that in one-on-ones and had it be a like continuous part of every team meeting, and wasn't afraid to like call out people who were doing this really well and also really kind of call out the people who weren't pulling their weight. And so she was a perfect example of someone that took sort of a SMBAE priority and then really put her own spin on it by, taking it a step further, really rallying her team around it, and then really living it each and every day by managing to it in one-on-ones and team meetings. And actually, it was great because her team actually got excited about it, and the change management went really well with them because she was out ahead of it, and really just like continuously over communicating around it.
When I'm thinking about rolling out a change like that says, okay, AEs, now you own, a pipeline of your own that you've got to hit this commit. I imagine as a senior leader on that team, you're sitting there thinking, oh man, like this is going to be a very challenging, rollout. And then to have a manager to not only say, hey, you say 15, I'm going to do 20.
Yeah, it was phenomenal to have someone. Yeah, first of all, it is anytime you're rolling out major change management and when like life is getting harder for a team, of course, there's a little consternation. But what I found is when you've got great managers on the team that then take that sort of rally cry and go a step further and really embrace the change and help drive the change, that really stands out. And then also, change management done well has a very short kind of kickback. I remember being really nervous about rolling. I sent the new expectations out via an email, and I was really nervous about, what might come back from the team. And the truth is, there were some people that were happy about it, but by the next month, no one was talking about it. It was just par for the course. It was just the new norm of expectations, and people kind of eventually understood it, got it, and got behind it.
Right on. And just for proof point, that manager that you were talking about now, you don't have to call her out, but did she take a step up in her career shortly after that?
Absolutely. Yep. She's managing manager, second line leader at LinkedIn and thriving.
Right on. So we've talked a little bit about prioritization. You mentioned the next piece is obviously getting the right people on the bus. So talk to me about, do you mean just hiring, firing? Like, what are you talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the hiring and firing. I think, I think one of the most difficult parts about becoming a manager or growing your career as a manager is like, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people who go into sales really want to be liked. I think most humans on some element want to resonate with folks and be liked. And, when you're a manager, it does kind of put you in a position of having to make sometimes tough calls around people. But I think one of the things that really helps you stand out as an earlier manager is having a really high bar and a high standard for what makes it on your team and what gets recognized and celebrated, and the types of behaviors and people that you promote. And I think one of the things that really is another great skill to learn is, how do you set a high bar and then coach people up to that, provide continuous feedback when people are either at that bar or below that bar. And then, how do you get really great at making a fast decision when someone just isn't a good fit? And I once heard a quote from a mentor of mine that basically says, like, there's no shame in making a bad hire. I mean, when you're hiring at scale, that's just going to happen, but there's a shame in keeping a bad hire around. And I think a lot of times new managers are really reticent to make the tough call and start that performance management process. And I think it's very rare that someone's gut is wrong, frankly. And most people in reflecting wouldn't say, gosh, I wish I'd given that person a few more chances. They'd probably say, I kind of knew about 8 months ago this wasn't going to work out, and I kind of prolonged the inevitable.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I had to make my first couple of cuts, and it was some of the hardest. It was like the biggest sort of hill you got to climb over. But once you're on the other side, you're like, man, I wish I would have done that so much sooner. It's so much more obvious once you have a couple under your belt. And I think the piece that really helped me see the other side of things was trying to put look at life through their lens, right? If they're not performing, if you've already decided in your gut that they don't have a future at this organization, you're only doing them a disservice by keeping them around, because you're preventing them from building out their career in a positive direction, as opposed to you're keeping them around here and it's not going to be a good outcome for them. Totally.
It's funny. I think this is a place where compassion ends up getting misinterpreted, and not because of bad intent, but generally think people would want to stick around and try to make it work. But to your point, often the more compassionate thing to do is just to have that honest conversation. I mean, sales is pretty black and white. I mean, there's of course nuance on if everyone's missing their number, did we set the numbers right, et cetera. But if you have a healthy distribution and there's just a certain number of folks who just can't get up and over the line, they know it, right? There's no surprise. The team knows it. And so what you end up creating is you're not doing that individual any service by, to your point, keeping them around in a position that they're failing. You're stifling their career in a way because, they don't have a great future at the company. They're not going to, thrive long-term. And then I think you're also doing it a service to the teammates around them as well, in that, you're sort of setting a new lower bar for what good looks like, and you're preventing them from learning from a set of peers across the board that can push them and help them learn and grow and get better.
You're totally right. It creates that sort of culture that accepts mediocrity, right? And people want to be working on teams where, hey, everybody surrounding me is an A player, and I'm learning from all these excellent players. And then if you allow a couple of sort of mediocre players to stick around where they're, consistently under their numbers, it sort of takes away from the luster of being on that A team. Now you're sort of the A- team.
Exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, making those decisions as quickly as possible is super valuable. It just saves everybody a ton of time. So when you said, transitioning, when you said improving the organization, right? I think we had talked a little bit, when we did the pre-interview about a LinkedIn example. I think we were talking about territories. Can you talk about how, somebody on the front, a new frontline manager can help sort of improve the organization?
Yeah, I think this is a big one, because if you want to, continue your career beyond frontline manager into director, into VP of sales, your sort of incentives or at changes, and it widens quite a bit, right? It's no longer about just nailing your small 8 to 10 person team's number. It becomes, how do you improve the results at the segment or company level overall? And I think this is a great skill for managers to develop and can really help folks stand out. So I think, what you really want to be doing is always taking a step back away from just your own direct team success and thinking about how you can improve the organization and the results overall. So yeah, I think an example here would be some of the ways that we started looking at territories at LinkedIn, and an example of how something may not benefit your specific team, but might be good for the company overall. So at LinkedIn for a while, we had a named account list, but then also a geographically based inbound model. And for the team that owned, like California, New York, that geo model was awesome. And by the way, those reps that owned parts of California and New York tended to be the ones at club. And one of the transitions that that I actually brought forward and made was moving away from a geo-based territory model that inherently wasn't fair. And by the way, also kind of put under capacity the folks who were working the really kind of lush territories, and actually suggested that we go to an inbound round robin model, even though at the time it wasn't super advantageous for just my direct team. And the reason being, I felt like if we were able to fairly distribute inbound ops, we'd be able to get more out of each of those ops, because you'd actually have, 100 reps against the inbound demand, as opposed to sort of this bottleneck of like 10 reps who owned the best territories. And we ended up implementing that change. And even though it wasn't great, because, my team owned a lot of California, it ended up, increasing our kind of year over year efficacy by like 20 or 30%. Because again, we were fairly distributing and better measuring inbound demand with capacity. And so I think that's a perfect example of thinking outside of just your own direct team or the reps on your team, and thinking more broadly about, hey, how as a business do we really, increase our yield?
Well, and you're right. It totally shows the capacity for sort of thinking outside of the confines of your day-to-day.
Yep.
Which I think is which sounds like it's what you're looking for when you're trying to recruit and hire, or promote sort of directors and VPs, is you want that people that can sort of take the longer view and move more out of the day-to-day and into the long-term strategic thinking.
Yeah. I mean, if we were to distill the advice down even further, it'd be exactly hiring for folks who can, execute on the day-to-day, but also think bigger. And then also folks who aren't afraid to make the right calls, even tough calls on people quickly.
Mm-hmm. And so let's explore this sort of, this decision in the role that you were at. Were you in the sales manager role here?
Yes.
And then,
actually I was in a sales manager role, hoping to earn one of the director level roles.
Gotcha. And so I'm assuming there's multiple other sales managers, some of them with underperforming territories, some of them that have, reps with really strong territories. And what you're proposing here actually had an impact on your team, but helped you sort of stand out and prove to the executive team that you have the foresight and you are able to look at the business as a whole.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And I mean, there's a component of this that's, I just think, so integral to being a really great sales manager and standing out as a potential business leader, right? Like even another tactical example of commission plans, right? Often we as sales leaders have to roll out changes, sometimes that our team's fired up about, sometimes that our team's not fired up about, on commission plan changes. But at the end of the day, as a sales manager, if you can understand the bigger business objective, and the fact that, for instance, sales and marketing efficiency are a very real thing and something that a business needs to think through, I think the faster you become, what I would call like a valued business leader, not just in it only for yourself sales manager.
Mm-hmm. That's fair, and it's because it just shows the wider, that you're taking the wider view and not just, I'm trying to work directly to my commission check or my bonus check.
Yep, exactly.
So moving on to the fourth and final way that you can stand out as a sales manager. One of the things we've kind of talked about a couple of times, and we've definitely alluded to, is making decisions quickly, and not just making, decisions, making the right decisions, making good decisions. And as a sales manager, and maybe we can look at this through the lens of sort of sales manager, sales director, VP of sales, but maybe if we start as a sales manager, it doesn't seem like there are an abundance of decisions that you're sort of involved in. So can you give me an example of one that you might be facing as a sales manager, and then we can look at sort of director and VP.
Yeah, I think as a sales manager, there are definitely very real decisions that you can, if not make, that you can certainly influence. So a prime example, just from recent Intercom history, we were trying to really understand what's the right incentive model, or really quota, for our kind of high velocity relationship managers. So folks that are responsible for covering sort of the bottom end of our existing business customer segment. And we were really trying to think about what's a fair way that also drives business impact to sort of quota these folks. And our frontline manager on the team did some work to really understand where they were having the highest revenue impact today, and then was able to kind of tell a narrative of how that was misaligned to the way that we were quoting them in the first half, and was actually able to get us to a place where we changed their quota components for the second half of the year. And I think he did that very well by understanding how the decision was going to get made, and what things were going to be important to the person making the decision, which was actually me. And so, he did a great job of kind of understanding that I was going to be the ultimate decision maker, but that a big contributor to that decision was going to be sales ops. So he worked with sales ops and kind of partnered, also worked with his counterpart over in EMEA, and then was able to kind of put together a data-driven presentation that and like tell that in a narrative style way that helped articulate why this was more fair for his team, but also good for the business. And so I think, what he did really well there was he understood where different people were going to play roles in the decision process, and then he understood what those people would care about. And for me, it was going to be bringing in some data to be credible, and then having that balance between being really fair to the individuals on the team, but also impactful for the business.
And it sounds like he did a really great job of sort of understanding where he fit in that in your decision-making process, and the value that he could bring, which specifically sounds like understanding that at your level, you may not have time to dig into all the individual dashboards or individual reports in all that data. And you may not see it from the ground level like they are.
Exactly.
Whereas they've got like a tuned gut where they're like, oh, I've got this feeling. And then what he did really well was go and find the data to support, here's that feeling, and then surface that up to you.
Exactly. So he understood who was going to be involved in the decision, the players that he needed to partner with and work with. And then he understood exactly how to kind of distill the relevant parts of the information and frankly, in this case, speak my language, which is going to be always straddling what's right for the individuals and the team, but also drives business impact.
Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do. And he's providing the additional sort of context for you to help make a better decision.
Exactly.
Right on. We talked a little bit about some decision-making frameworks. Did you want to share a little bit about how those have sort of fit into the role? And you know what? I think as I'm saying this, I think I'm realizing that we should I did promise that I'd talk about sort of making the right decision at the managerial level, and then the sort of leveling up to director level. So we'll come back to the decision-making frameworks in just a sec.
Okay.
But so decision-making at the managerial level, we talked about the example of, them sort of bubbling up the data to you, and that had a massive impact and helped them stand out. How about with the VP and director relationship? You're in a VP role right now. What does it look like? What do those decisions look like as a director, and how can they best support you?
I think very, very similar to the managerial. Again, I think it's almost like the question around prioritization, how important is that at various levels? I think it's just kind of order of magnitude, right? I think frontline managers can certainly lean in and influence decisions, and even more so at the director level. And I think a lot of the same kind of core advice would remain, which is understand who needs to be involved and who's actually going to be making the decision. Because I think a lot of times you can waste time by going and like pitching your perspective to a bunch of people and getting them to agree. At the end of the day, understanding who actually is empowered to make that decision, how to get that decision done, is really key. And that's, I think, a real important attribute for a director level person to have. And then in addition, it's really understanding your stakeholders. Like once you've identified who all needs to be involved, understanding what they care about and being able to speak in their language and distill it down. And I think you brought up a great point earlier, which is be able to very quickly give them, here's like what's happening on the ground that you're probably not aware of in in a kind of concise and accurate way, and then bring in the information or compel them, tying it directly to something that decision maker cares about.
Really interesting to hear the sort of parallels between, advice you would give to an account exec in terms of how to close a deal, how to find the decision maker, right? How to make sure that you're not just pitching to anybody, that you're actually running a strong discovery. It's almost like you're taking that process and you're turning it internally.
Totally. It's actually really funny because there are folks who are really senior on executive teams that don't have sales experience directly. But in many cases, I always tease them that they'd absolutely kill it in a sales role, because a lot of how to navigate internal, for lack of a better word, politics, I think has a lot of analogies to an actual selling to power sales process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, especially if you're working, whatever you want to call it, strategic sale, solution sale, something that's, more than a few $1,000s, and you're not in that high velocity mode. Exactly. And you got a couple of buying influences in there. Like the parallels are very similar.
Absolutely.
Right on. And so we've kind of scaled up from manager, VP, director. Talk to me about some of these ways that we make decisions. You had mentioned some decision-making frameworks that you've actually utilized. And can you help me understand the context and where those sort of fit in your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've become a big fan. I will admit, a few years ago, I felt like at LinkedIn we overdid the decision-making frameworks, and they come from management consulting. Mm-hmm. But I actually am now a huge believer in them, and I will often have us in the sales organization here at Intercom kind of go through the exercise. So there's two decision-making frameworks that I'm familiar with. One is called the RAPID, and one is called the DACY. And I'll focus on the DACY because that's what we use here at Intercom. So DACY is D stands for driver. And this is the person that at the end of the day is accountable for driving a lot of the thinking and process behind getting to sort of a recommendation for a decision. There's A, which is approver. So that's the person that's like ultimately the decision maker. There are C, which are contributors. And there's I, which is informed. And so just kind of play this out for a decision. Your driver is going to be the person that's responsible for ultimately generating that kind of recommendation and making sure that they pull in the contributors to get their point of view and perspective. And then it's really on the approver to make sure that they deeply understand, their recommendation from the driver, and that they understand where the various contributors align to that recommendation or misalign to that recommendation before they make the decision or kind of approve the recommendation. So I think like where the DACYs are awesome and go really well is it really helps create clarity within an organization on how a decision is going to get made and kind of who has a seat at the table and what their role is within that. And then and when they're done well, you spend time really thoughtfully putting together the DACY to make sure you're not like missing major groups. And you also, as an approver, make sure that you not only just hear the recommendation from the driver, but that you also understand where other people sitting around that table, so your contributors stand on the recommendation or a decision that needs to be made. Where they don't go well is when a driver basically just says, well, I'm just going to run with this and I'm going to go get like a quick, fast stamp of approval. And then, basically what you end up is you're going to like often end up reversing that decision and going through the entire process again. So what I love about these frameworks is, I always think that even if you don't like where you sit on the DAISY, it's always helpful to understand what role you're going to be playing towards a decision being made. And then it makes it really easy to move more quickly when you understand all the players, who needs to contribute what. And you can then truly get a sense of a decision or an approval process because all the people who needed to participate have had a chance to do so, and the org can make a decision.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it brings just a phenomenal amount of clarity to the entire process.
Yeah, exactly.
And so typically if you're sitting in your VP seat, I'm assuming the person that's more of a driver, that sounds like one of your managers, directors that's rolling up to you, and then you're sitting in the approver chair?
Yeah, I mean, as a head of sales, I think sometimes the driver actually sits on your team. So it might be a member of your sales ops team. It might be one of the sales directors or sales managers.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be a cross-functional person, right? So like there may be an initiative around redoing all of our customer stories, and maybe PMM is the driver and ultimately I'm the approver because I've got to make sure that I'm accountable to making, that my team can go out and clearly articulate customer benefit across various use cases in different customer segments. So it's either generally a member of your team, but I think there's also cases where it can be cross-functional as well.
Right on. Could you run me through an example of maybe a time when you've gone through the DAISY? Yeah,
I mean, we actually just did a bunch of DAISYs around our quota on commissions strategy. So there's a number of decisions that need to be made fairly quickly when it comes to designing quotas across a bunch of different types of reps, designing rules around how people get paid or not paid on certain deals, and then also figuring out what the commission plan, kickers, et cetera, like what's the incentive structure that you're trying to align your team to so that you can kind of really have them run at the biggest needle movers in your business. And so myself and our head of finance sat down with input from folks on his team and folks from my sales ops team and came up with a DAISY between basically sales ops, sales leaders, and finance that make sure that finance has a chance to contribute to quota setting, which ultimately I'm the approver on. And it means that like sales ops needs to come up with a recommendation, go get finance's thoughts, and then, bring that to me. Same with kind of commission plan design. And we also need to get input from the sales directors and sales managers, et cetera. So it basically, we've created a more organized process around who needs to be involved in what so that we get to the best business outcome that people actually buy into, which at the end of the day is kind of what you're trying to do around quotas and commission plans.
I think it's the number one reason why salespeople move on from an organization for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Plays a huge role, right? Like if you're risking 50, 40% of your compensation, you want to know that you are running at a target that is achievable. And that if you're able to blast through and exceed quota, which, you want every person on your team running at that goal, what's the upside? And, obviously you want people to feel like things are fair, but also, again, putting on your business leader hat, you need to make sure that you're holding your team to an appropriately high bar and matching kind of impact with payout.
Totally. And so can you talk to me about the impact that you think using the DAISY framework had on this last decision versus had you just said, okay, well, here's what we need to do and roll it out?
Yeah, I think people weren't clear who was making what decision. So we had like frontline managers reaching out to people in finance, people on sales ops. People weren't clear who was making the decision or who was involved. It also was a slower process and it wasn't clear who was making the decision. And so what this allowed us to do is really help people understand between finance, sales ops, and myself, who was kind of owning what. And then it also helped us move a heck of a lot faster. We were able to then get second half quotas and commission plans out weeks ahead of where we would have been had we not designed a DAISY.
Right on. And how do you decide that you even need to do a DAISY in the first place? I imagine this would get to be quite annoying of a process if you're doing this with every tiny little decision.
That's a good question. I think it's, for me, more of an art than a science, but I think generally if it's a like high impact decision that's going to impact like a large group of people, or like it's a big thing in the business, and if it's cross-functional, that's the area. Or if it's cross-functional or it affects like multiple layers within an organization, I think a DAISY is really helpful.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you can't be DAISYing every single decision that gets made.
That's fair. Especially if it's a smaller team, you definitely don't want to be adding. This sounds like a little bit of process, a little bit of paperwork.
It is a little upfront work, but frankly, I think it helps you move faster. So I actually think DAISYs, while they might have sort of like a big company process heavy knock, end up important even for small companies. And they end up often speeding up the decision-making process. It's funny, my husband works at a smaller startup. I think it's like 50, definitely south of 100 people. And we were talking about even at that size, where the DAISY or rapid decision-making framework would be helpful. Because it also like quickly gets at like, who's accountable for driving something? And then like, who's the stakeholder? I think it helps accelerate and actually creates better relationships often within an organization cross-functionally.
And I think anytime you're creating more clarity up front and you're forcing people to, do a little bit of work that are going to be involved in making a big decision, I think you're going to get a better outcome.
100%. Well, and like to that point, you actually get to a better outcome because you're thinking up front all the parties that need to contribute to something. For instance, here's like where a DAISY would go wrong. If we are about to test something new on our website, and including like website purchase experience to SDR handoff, and I get together with product and marketing and we come up with this like razzle dazzle, here's the new process that we want to test. It's going to be great, but we don't bring analytics in at the right time. We may get way out ahead of our skis, spend a bunch of time together, and then at the like 11th hour realize that we can't design the test in a way that analytics is going to be able to like call. And so that's where I think DAISYs are really hugely time saving, because you get to better decisions and outcomes when the right people are involved in helping craft that decision.
Oh, I think it's like an old racing saying, and I only know it because I've heard it on Top Gear 1,000 times. But if you want to go fast, you have to go slow. And
yes,
they're always talking.
Go slow to speed up, or go slow to go fast.
Yeah, yes. I think they're talking about like hitting the corner at the apex at the right speed, so you don't have to like do any extra braking or wiggling around. But it's not necessarily about the speed that you carry into the corner. It's about your execution and the sort of technique going through, because you're measuring not just your speed at one given point in time, it's throughout the entire turn, right? And then you're stringing a bunch of turns together, and it's in the same way we're stringing a bunch of decisions together. And so the more time that you're putting in up front, the less you're doing on the back of the scrambling at the 11th hour going, oh no, we didn't bring analytics in.
Exactly.
Anything we've missed? I want to get to sort of wrapping this up, but anything we've missed on sort of making the right decision quickly?
No, I think those are the key components. It's really understanding how the decision is going to get made and who's involved, and then bringing that clarity to the team.
Right on. So if I could do a quick sort of summary of where we sit so far, if you're a new sales manager or an experienced sales manager looking to make that step from sort of managerial to director or VP level, really the first piece is focusing on seeing yourself in the bigger picture, right? Understand the larger picture, not just your immediate goals and how you fit into that, and then rallying your team behind that bigger goal. Even if it's sort of, not going to service your the immediate performance of your team. It's maintaining the culture of performance by hiring the right people and firing the right people at as quickly as you can. It's widening your scope so that you're not just down into the details. And I feel like I'm repeating what I said in the first one, but I feel like there's a lot of sort of overlap between, prioritizing and sort of looking at the organization, not just through the lens of your immediate comp plan, but looking at it as a whole, because that's really what the senior level folks are looking for. And then making decisions quickly using these frameworks, understanding that sometimes you do need to move a little bit slower and get all the right people involved at the get-go so that you make the right decision and you don't have to, stress everybody out at the 11th hour.
Absolutely. Yep. I think great summary.
Right on. LB, I feel like I learned a ton. I feel like I could grill you for hours and hours and hours, but I know I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to give you a chance to to promote yourself, promote Intercom. Tell us what, what is it you're working on right now? What are you looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, if you are a sales leader listening to Collin's show here and you want a next gen business messenger for your SDR group that can help ensure that you speak to prospective customers quickly and route the right leads to your team, I'd love for you to reach out, and I'd love to have a conversation about how Intercom could be a real integral part of your tech stack, help you guys get to the right leads faster. And then second, if you are a sales leader, manager, or incredible kind of SMB or mid-market rep, we're looking for great talent here at Intercom. We're going to be hiring across the next few months out ahead as we head into next year. We're doing some really exciting things and focusing on new market segments. And we are, I think, at that really unique place as a company of starting to really build scale and figure things out, but also we're still in a place where we're looking for folks to come in and find new ways of doing things and continue to write our playbook. So if you are someone who really enjoys that, we'd love to speak.
Right on. I've had the luxury of meeting a few people from the Intercom team, and I can't say enough great things about them, from Des all the way at the top to Jeffrey Serlin, who we had on the show a few months back, who was excellent. And we talked, if you're interested in sales ops, I highly recommend checking that episode. I don't remember the name or the number of it. I apologize. Too many names and numbers for me to remember, but I can't say enough good things about LB and the whole team over at Intercom.
Thanks so much, Collin. I've really enjoyed being on the show, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, LB. And we're going to throw a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes if anybody's looking to reach out and get in touch with you. I'm assuming that's the best way.
Absolutely.
Right on. Well, thanks for joining us today, and see everybody next week.